Hello everybody, so today we're going to be talking about alternatives to hysterectomy, and what I mean when I say that is that there are a number of ways that you can achieve your transition goals and make your body a more habitable and less dysphoria-inducing place without having to undergo surgery and without having to remove these body parts. Two disclaimers before we get into that though. The first one is that we're going to be using medical terminology for the sake of clarity in this video. It's really hard to talk about this stuff without using medical terminology. So if you're not in a good headspace for hearing about AFAB-specific body parts, organs, and bodily functions, you might want to come back on a day when your dysphoria is a little more in check, okay? Next thing, two, not three. Second thing I want to talk about is that I'm not qualified to talk about any of this stuff. I have exactly zero medical training. I don't even have a bachelor's degree. I am just a trans dude who's been on testosterone for about a year and a half, who's experienced some minor health complications from being on testosterone, and because of the combination of having those complications and because of my doctors not being trained to manage those complications, I ended up reading a lot of medical literature on my own. So I'm just here to share what I have learned from pirating studies on the internet. Sebastian says hello. So a lot of doctors wrongly assume that all transmasculine people want or need a hysterectomy eventually. And the first thing I want to say is that, hey, did you know that it is not medically necessary for a transmasculine person to get a hysterectomy on the basis of them being trans? It can be medically necessary on the basis of them having dysphoria from having those parts in their body, but being trans or being on testosterone does not make having a hysterectomy medically necessary. Contrary to popular belief, being on testosterone does not actually increase your risk of endometrial or ovarian cancer. Of course, it can also happen that a transmasculine person might want or need a hysterectomy due to a non-trans exclusive medical issue. You know, trans people can have the same heckin' health issues that cis people do sometimes, and it doesn't have to be from testosterone. It just happens. If you're interested in doing a little bit of reading about ovarian and endometrial cancer risks in transmasculine population, in AFABs who are on testosterone, this is a really good article, complete with hella goddamn citations, and it's actually a really good website in general if you're looking for information about trans medical stuff, the medical side of transition, and it's not limited to resources for transmasculine people. It's also for trans feminine people, and they mention considerations for non-binary people too. So really good website. Please check out the UCSF Transgender Care Guidelines. It's really good stuff. And basically what this article explains is that there is a theoretical risk of creating a situation where there is too much estrogen, which could increase the risk of endometrial hyperplasia or cancer. But whenever you're on testosterone, yeah, what are you doing, buddy? Whenever you're on testosterone, your ovaries basically cease to function and they stop producing estrogen. And your estrogen, trans men's estrogen is actually very low instead of very high. That's just how it usually works out. And most of us go to the doctor every 3 to 6 to 12 months to make sure that our hormones are in check. So as long as you don't have like weirdly super high estrogen for some reason, this isn't going to be something to worry about. So to sum up this whole paper in one sentence, despite there being a theoretical risk of an increased risk of cancer, it doesn't pan out that way in real life. So again, link for this is going to be in the description. Definitely check it out. And another thing is, if you're curious about why this myth is so prevalent, it probably has something to do, at least a little bit to do, with Robert Eads, who is a trans guy who died in 1999 because, bigotry is deadly. Basically what happened was he got ovarian cancer, as people do sometimes. And when he went to more than a dozen different doctors, they all said, no, actually, we will not treat your ovarian cancer because, I don't know, it would damage the reputation of my practice because, trans people are icky, and so maybe you should just go die instead. I don't know. It's not my problem. And then he died. So to make it perfectly crystal clear, hysterectomy is not medically necessary on the basis of being trans unless you need a hysterectomy on the basis of alleviating dysphoria. But of course, if you have a family history of ovarian or endometrial cancer and there's an increased risk for whatever reason that you might get it, and you're just hey, I just want to get rid of it because if I don't have the body part, then I can't get cancer in the body part, then yeah, that's a totally heckin' valid reason to get a hysterectomy. But you don't have to if you don't want to. Don't let your doctor fucking tell you that you have to, please. Okay, so now we know that testosterone does not make a hysterectomy medically necessary, but there were two parts to that. They don't just assume that we medically need a hysterectomy. Most doctors also assume that we want hysterectomies. Not all trans masculine people are uncomfortable with the idea of pregnancy. There are a lot of seahorse dads out there, and I think they're cool as heck. I am extremely uncomfortable with the concept of carrying a pregnancy, but you do you. Heck yeah, live your life. I'm just a different type of dad, you know what I mean? I gotta say, I find it a little bit sus that doctors are so eager to perform hysterectomies and permanently sterilizing procedures on trans masculine people, but not cis women of the same age. When a cis woman of the same age tries to get a hysterectomy or tries to get a tubal ligation, a lot of the time the surgeon says, please give me written consent from your husband, or they'll just say no because, you aren't 40 years old yet, you're 30. Have you had kids already? Well, what, you don't want any more kids? I don't know. I'm just pretty sure that I should make this decision for you because I'm a misogynist and I think that your body is an incubator. So, if I was trying to be positive, I would say maybe it's not transphobia. Maybe it's not that they want to sterilize all trans people immediately. Maybe it's that maybe it's just male privilege. That's good. That's a good thing, right? Politics makes me sad. So I actually personally do not want to have a hysterectomy for a couple of reasons. And I know that I'm not the only person who feels this way. The first one is going under surgery sucks. A lot of people have various health conditions that can make going under anesthesia dangerous or extremely unpleasant. Also, surgeries are not without risk in general. I believe that this is relatively rare, but I read that vaginal prolapse is a thing that can happen after getting a hysterectomy, and the idea of the vagina telescoping out of the body is it is the most nightmarish thing I can imagine. Which really is kind of the nail in the coffin for me not wanting a hysterectomy. Also, I just had top surgery 7 months ago. I don't want to recover from a surgery again. Recovering from surgery sucks. And I also don't want to do it if it can make my vagina telescope out of my body. And then the other reason for me is access to sex hormones, because did you know that if you do not have a good amount of testosterone or estrogen in your body, then your bone density can decrease and you can get something called osteoporosis, which basically turns you into Uncle Boneless from what's it called, Cow and Chicken? I don't know. I just remember Uncle Boneless, and I know I don't want to be Uncle Boneless. It might sound a little bit silly to worry about, you remove your ovaries, but just stay on testosterone. It's no big deal. Well, guess what, honey? There's something called politics, and there's something called money, and there's something called called in Arkansas right now. They are trying to pass a bill to make it illegal for trans people to get the health care they need. So, you know, somebody could pass a law that makes it so I can't have testosterone anymore, or I could lose my insurance, or there could just be a shortage, and then, ta-da, I am not producing enough sex hormone, and now I am 30 years old with no bones. And then also when it comes to access to sex hormones, I want to give y'all a little bit of the 101 on atrophy. I have a video about atrophy on my channel already, but I'm just going to read you a 101 that I wrote down because it is extremely important, and it's also going to be relevant to the meat and potatoes of the video where we talk about all of the options. When a person with ovaries uses testosterone, the ovaries are suppressed. They stop producing estrogen, which results in a potentially reversible early menopause state. The uterus, vagina, and urinary tract are dense with estrogen receptors. If no estrogen is available to bind to the receptors, these parts slow or stop epithelial cell regeneration. Epithelial cells are like skin cells. They're protective. They're inside of the vagina and inside of, they line all of these organs, okay? And they need to replace themselves in order to keep the part healthy. Let's say you get a scraped knee, you're a little kid riding your bike, oh no, my knee. Let's say if your epithelial cells stopped regenerating, then you're not gonna repair that knee. It's going to be like a permanent wound, essentially, or it's going to take a super long time to heal. Another consequence of not having enough estrogen is the vaginal pH raises, and both of these things together massively increases your risk of infection. So for me personally, what I experienced is chronic UTIs, and I've been on a topical estrogen to help alleviate that problem for I think about 5 months now, and gradually I'm getting UTIs less frequently, and each time they've been a bit less severe. So hopefully eventually I just won't be getting them anymore. Another consequence of not having enough estrogen in this part of your body is cramping after several years on T. It is likely, not always, but very often due to endometrial atrophy. So if you plan on keeping your vagina and your uterus, then you should probably be on some kind of a topical estrogen. Estrogen unopposed by progestin will increase your risk of cancer twofold every 5 years though, so you should be on a topical estrogen and a progestin. And to put this in here, because you probably real tired of hearing about estrogen. Estrogen's not your enemy. Topical estrogen has low systemic absorption, meaning it is mostly just absorbed by these organs specifically, and it is very unlikely to affect the masculinization process. So the short of it is that you need estrogen to keep these parts healthy. Otherwise, you experience the same health problems that cis women experience after menopause, but at an earlier age. And the only difference between a cis woman's naturally occurring menopause and a trans masculine person's testosterone-induced menopause is time, because this is a progressive condition. It gets worse over time, and menopause usually starts at age 50, and a lot of trans people start transitioning in their 20s. And so let's say 90 will be our age that we're gonna live to. So cis women only gonna have to deal with it for about 40 years usually, unless they had a hysterectomy for another reason, or don't produce enough estrogen for any other reason. I don't know, 90 minus 20, you're gonna live for 70 years with atrophy. You need to treat that. You need to do something about that. If you are going to be keeping these body parts, you need to be on a topical estrogen. And I'm actually really shocked that doctors do not mention this whenever you start HRT. At least my doctors didn't. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure a lot of them just don't know or don't care. I don't know. So actually, I'm curious, if you are a cis woman who has had a hysterectomy before age 50, especially before age 30. Did your doctor tell you that you're going to need to be on some kind of an estrogen to keep your parts healthy, or did they just go, there's your histo, see ya? I'm really curious. Okay, we're finally here. We made it. You're here with me. We got to the part. This is, like I said, the meat and potatoes of the video. So, transition goals and how to achieve them, a mix and match adventure. This is not going to be totally exhaustive because I'm not a gynecologist, but I'm going to share with you everything that I have learned so far. And if there's anything that I'm missing here, please let me know in the comment section, because I want to know all of my options. So let's do a little bit of arts and crafts here. So why do people get hysterectomies if there are side effects and if you don't technically need it? Well, it's to accomplish a couple of goals. One of them is to reduce estrogen. Another one of them is to reduce cancer risk. Another one is dysphoria, to alleviate dysphoria. So, first thing I want to say is when it comes to alleviating dysphoria, if just knowing that body part is there bothers you, if it causes you dysphoria, a lot of distress, then a lot of times hysterectomy might be the only option to alleviate that type of dysphoria. For me personally, since dysphoria is different for everyone, I'm not bothered by the fact that these organs are in my body. They only bother me whenever they're doing something. So if they are bleeding or cramping or being pregnant. So when it comes to dysphoria, the solution to that just might be a hysterectomy, and that might be the only thing that can be a solution to that. Sorry for blinking like a freak. I have really dry eyes. Reduce cancer risk. So we talked about this one earlier. Being on testosterone does not increase your risk of any of these types of cancer. But if you have like a family history of these types of cancer, then you might want to get a hysto. Totally valid. Hysterectomy can work out for a lot of people. A lot of people get good results. Now, I wanted to include this one because a lot of people do talk about this, about reducing estrogen by getting their ovaries removed. It's also something that I failed to mention that's rather obvious, is that there are a lot of different kinds of hysterectomy. There's like total hysterectomy. There are various different kinds of partial hysterectomies, and we'll be getting a little bit into that later. But when it comes to reducing your estrogen, just to be frank, it's not necessary at all. So I don't want to be invalidating to what people have felt like they've experienced. I've read a lot of people online say that, oh yeah, I removed my ovaries and now it seems like I'm masculinizing more, my transition is going better. I don't want to invalidate those people, but I just want to say frankly that this is not necessary and also probably not very helpful. The only time a transmasculine person will need to directly reduce their E levels with some kind of blocker is whenever they're going through puberty, whenever they're on puberty blockers to stop those changes from happening. The only time that this might be a good idea is if you are a transmasculine person who was on blockers during puberty and you prevented all of the estrogenic changes and you're really concerned with like trying to make sure that you never have enough estrogen in your body to make any of these changes happen. That's a really understandable reason to want to continue some kind of blocker or to remove the ovaries completely. Okay, so now it's time to get into the complicated stuff. So this is gonna be fun. I can't wait to be held accountable for my mistakes. So, the three things that the only reason why I would want to get a hysterectomy is because my body sometimes does these things that I do not want it to do. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a Venn diagram and we're going to fill out, medications and procedures that can stop your body from doing these dysphoria-inducing or annoying things without having to go through a hysterectomy. We'll probably put hysterectomy on the Venn diagram Venn diagram just because we can. Okay, we have the Venn diagram set up, and now we are ready to solve these problems, to figure out what kind of treatments are going to be good for you. One thing to keep in mind is that everybody's body is different, and then also all of these treatments have different kinds of risks associated with them, and I do not have 1 million hours to go over every single one, but I will give you sort of like a guideline, like a jumping board to start off with, and then you can do more of your own research, and I will leave some good resources in the description so you can figure out what's good for you. One that I definitely recommend is called Hello Clue. A lot of the time they're pretty good at using inclusive language, but it's a lot of like menstrual health, like information on like preventing pregnancy, different kind of treatments you can go through and things, different medications, birth controls. So that's definitely one I would recommend, but they do not 100% always use inclusive language like they should. They do an okay job at it though. So let's start listing some of these off. Okay, so remember whenever I said that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to all of this stuff? Well, that is what the Venn diagram is hopefully going to address. So there are some people who absolutely cannot handle a pregnancy. There are some people who cannot handle bleeding. There are some people who have atrophy problems, and some people who don't plan on keeping a vagina, so it's not really relevant for them to treat atrophy. So let's start typing out some of our solutions and then putting them where they belong. Testosterone can stop bleeding. For most people, it will stop your cycles, which is really cool. I love you, testosterone. But I want to put a side note in here, and you can find an article about this on the UCSF website that I told you about earlier. If you stop bleeding, if testosterone stops your cycles and then you start experiencing spotting, you're gonna want to go to the gynecologist, because that can be a sign of something not good happening. But sometimes spotting happens, so don't freak out, don't be scared. And also, a lot of medications we're going to be talking about can cause spotting when you're first starting it for the first few weeks or the first few months. It's just better to be safe than sorry. If you have health insurance and you have that privilege. Something that can work for both stopping bleeding and stopping pregnancy is oral birth control. There is a massive variety of birth controls, oral birth controls, and so I highly recommend you going onto the Hello Clue website or onto another website. And like Planned Parenthood's website is also really good for birth control options. But oral birth control pills, hormonal pills, are often going to be a pretty good option for pregnancy and bleeding. And the thing that you need to know about stopping bleeding while on an oral birth control is that a lot of birth controls will have like 3 weeks of one color pill, and then the 4th week will be a different color. The 4th week is just placebo. There's no medication inside of that. And the bleeding that happens during that week is not an actual period. It's not from ovulation. It's not from an egg that gets released. It's from withdrawing the medication. It's a withdrawal bleeding. And so what I'm saying is basically, if you don't have the withdrawal, then you don't have the bleeding. So you can either start a pack early, or you can like space out the pills so you don't go too many days without the medication. Okay, and the next one is we want to talk about IUDs. The hormonal IUD is, it contains progestin, and that can potentially stop bleeding. It's a birth control, of course, so it helps with the pregnancy. And for some people, it helps with bleeding, but it's kind of like a your mileage may vary type of thing. And to be honest, a lot of things on here are going to have various results, just kind of depending on how your body reacts to it, because bodies are heckin' weird and they don't always do what you want them to do. And if having hormones in your system is not an option for you for whatever reason, or if you don't care about the bleeding part and only need the pregnancy part, then you can try the copper IUD, which only works for pregnancy. It does not contain anything that's going to stop the bleeding, and in fact, for some people, it actually makes the bleeding worse. So the next one is endometrial ablation. This is a procedure where the endometrial lining is destroyed, is annihilated. This can be done with extreme cold, I think extreme hot, or with like radio waves. I was really excited whenever I first heard about endometrial ablation because I was like, what? No uterine lining? That means you can't get pregnant. But actually you can still get pregnant if you get endometrial ablation. It's just you're more likely to have an extremely high risk pregnancy. So if you do get endometrial ablation, it is absolutely imperative that you are also on some kind of other birth control. Also, endometrial ablation can result in scarring, which can be painful, and people who experience scarring often just go ahead and get a hysterectomy to remove the uterus afterwards. So I'm not sure if endometrial ablation is really one that I'm super excited about anymore, but I only said all the bad things about it. I didn't say the good thing. The bleeding. Endometrial ablation is usually performed for people who have really severe bleeding or like too much bleeding and cramping. So if you bleed too much, and you might be a good candidate for this procedure. You don't want to get a endometrial ablation until you're ready to not have kids. But it can potentially be a good option, especially for people who have really heavy periods who need them to stop. The next one is the Depo-Provera shot, and this is a progestin injection, and it does eventually work for both preventing pregnancy and stopping bleeding. But for the first 3 to 6 months, I think a lot of people experience tons of spotting. But after about a year, nearly half of users do not bleed at all. And users overall experience an average of 3 bleeding and spotting days per month. Some research shows that about 20% of users stop using this method because of irregular bleeding patterns, including no bleeding or unexpected bleeding. That one sounds very annoying to me, and I would not want it, but it is an option. Alright, next one is tubal ligation. I think that this is going to be the only other surgical thing on this Venn diagram, but tubal ligation is also called getting your tubes tied, but you don't just have to get them clipped off. I think it's like little clips that clamp them shut, which sounds kind of fucked up when you say it out loud, but you can also just get them removed, which is technically like a partial hysterectomy. I don't know. You can also get them cut, like snip snip, so they're not attached. Yeah, there's a couple of options when it comes to tubal ligation procedure. It works for pregnancy, but it does not stop bleeding. You might be like, hey, why doesn't the bleeding stop? Doesn't it stop the egg from traveling to the uterus? Yes, it does, but actually, the main reason why you bleed is not because of the heckin' egg, it's because the uterine lining gets all, I don't know, it builds up and then it sheds. So usually progestin is going to be a good way to manipulate that cycle and stop the bleeding. The next one is Nexplanon. That's the brand name. It's I think it's also a progestin implant in the arm. I'm only putting it in the pregnancy category. Technically, I think the people who made it and advertise it would probably put it in the pregnancy and bleeding section, but I'm only going to put it in the pregnancy section because it's basically like the Depo shot, except even worse. People spot on it, they bleed on it like crazy from what I've read. There's a link I'm going to give you guys. It's called How Every Hormonal Birth Control Affects Your Period, and this one, the implant. Over the first 3 months of use, between 15 and 20% of users experience bleeding that lasts for more than 14 days, and about 5% may have frequent bleeding. 11% of users may not bleed at all. In the first 3 months of use, on average, users tend to bleed or spot 7 days per month over the first 3 months of use. A user's average bleeding pattern after a year of use is similar to their pattern in the first 3 months. Within the first year of use, about 1 in 10 users discontinue this method because of irregular bleeding patterns. Alright, so far, you might have noticed that the atrophy section is empty, so let's fill that out a little bit. The first one is estrogen cream. So, estrogen cream in the atrophy only section. If you have read anything about atrophy, you probably have heard of estrogen cream before, and it does exactly what it's supposed to. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a cream that contains estrogen that you put inside of your parts. It has some really big problems though, or at least I have some really big problems with it. The first one is a lot of people have too much dysphoria to be putting cream inside of themselves every day or like 3 days a week. And even if you don't have bottom dysphoria, if you don't have a lot of bottom dysphoria, even if you're comfortable touching that part of your body, putting a cream in there is not fun. It's messy. I was on estrogen cream for a little while, and the first time that I used it, I don't know if I used too much or something, but I woke up with a headache and spotting. There is another bigger problem that I have with it though, which is cancer.gov, hormone therapy with estrogen, unopposed estrogen. Based on solid evidence, unopposed estrogen is associated with an increased risk of endometrial cancer. This excess risk can be eliminated by adding continuous progestin to estrogen therapy, but this combination is associated with an increased risk of breast cancer. So this part at the end about the breast cancer is not really going to be much of a concern if you have had top surgery. I have had top surgery, so I'm not really worried about this part. There's a very, very small amount of breast tissue that is left behind, but your risk of breast cancer becomes about equivalent as a cis guy's risk for breast cancer. What kind of risk are we talking about here with the increased risk of endometrial cancer? If you're using an estrogen only therapy, your risk is at least twofold higher. It is at least twice as high as people who do not use it. And the risk increases with duration of use. For me personally, I just do not feel comfortable using a medication that increases my risk of cancer substantially and progressively for 70 years straight. If I'm gonna live for 70 years and I'm gonna keep these body parts, it just doesn't sound like a good idea to me. So another option for atrophy is getting rid of the parts that are atrophied. There's a limit to this though, because obviously you cannot just willy-nilly say, hey doc, will you please remove my urinary tract and my bladder. You can't do that, but you can if you do not want your if you do not want the vagine, and if you do not want a uterus, then you can just go ahead and get rid of them. I mean, technically that is a hysterectomy, and technically I think that this would go here. So I'm gonna type hysterectomy, and I'm gonna put that in the middle because a hysterectomy usually will pretty much solve all of these problems. It definitely solves pregnancy. It solves 2/3 of the issue when it comes to atrophy. And as far as I know, you aren't really going to have any bleeding after hysterectomy except for like post-op bleeding, right? So hysterectomy is in the middle. Oh no, looks like the only solution besides mixing and matching all of these various treatments is gonna be hysterectomy. Golly gosh, why did I go through the effort of making this whole video if it's gotta be hysterectomy? Haha, got him, tricked you. It's NuvaRing again, baby. And of course, like we said earlier, it's a mix and match adventure. You can get in the middle by being on more than one of these medications. I don't know, testosterone and a copper IUD and estrogen cream. You can do that. You could take the depot shot and a estrogen cream. But, what is that you say? You want one thing that solves all of the problems? Hey, you should probably get on the NuvaRing or a generic of NuvaRing, which contains estrogen and progestin. And the progestin makes the bleeding stop, and it makes the babies not happen. And it treats the atrophy. It treats not just... Okay, so hysterectomy has a limitation on atrophy, right? Like we said earlier. Hysterectomy is not going to treat... You can't just take out the bladder and the urinary tract. Not going to happen. It's technically hysterectomy can't even work. It doesn't work to be in the middle. But we'll just leave it there. We'll be nice to hysterectomy. But NuvaRing though, okay? That's the thing that I've been on for about 5 months. So NuvaRing contains both progestin and estrogen. And so the cool thing about that, you remember we were talking about the cancer risk if you use estrogen alone? Well, you don't have the cancer risk anymore. Goodbye, cancer risk. But also, guess what? Estrogen cream does not prevent pregnancy. But NuvaRing does. OMG. NuvaRing is also in this stops the bleeding section as well. So maybe you're on testosterone, but it hasn't stopped your menstrual cycles for you for some reason. Or maybe you're on a low dose, so it hasn't stopped your cycle. Or maybe you're pre-T and you're looking for a good solution. Honestly, like, I think everybody... Any AFAB person who's on testosterone should probably be on NuvaRing, as long as they don't have like high risks for blood clots, because your risk for blood clotting, it can be pretty significant if you're like over 35 and a smoker. I think that's usually the type of person who should not be on NuvaRing. But the way that it stops periods, okay, this is important. It's the same as this stuff. You don't have actual periods when you're on NuvaRing. It stops ovulation. The blood that happens when you are on any of these progestin medications is withdrawal bleeding. So the instructions on NuvaRing will say something like, put it in for 3 weeks and then take it out at the end of the 3 weeks and then put a new one in a week later. So it's 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 3 weeks on again. And if you follow those instructions, you will have a withdrawal bleeding. You'll have like a pseudo period, and we don't want that, yeah? So what you do is you either fill your prescription and put a new one in at the end of the 3 weeks, or you can do what I do, because insurance can be strict sometimes, and you can just wear it you can keep it in for 4 weeks straight. That is what I do, and it actually is still effective as a birth control. If you do leave it in that long, you might want to double check if you get like a different generic, if that is still the case. But yeah, this is why I push NuvaRing really hard. And like, yeah, I know it sounds like I'm doing a brand thing. I'm Big Pharma. I'm a conspiracy, the trans conspiracy to sell NuvaRing. I actually use the off-brand of NuvaRing, thank you very much. So I'm not Big Pharma, I'm Small Pharma, I guess. Anyway, NuvaRing is fucking awesome. And that's the video. I know I kind of sound like I'm trying to pigeonhole everyone into... I've been saying there's no one-size-fits-all solution this whole time, and then it's like, get the NuvaRing, it's the one-size-fits-all solution. It isn't necessarily the right medication for everyone. I hope my enthusiasm did not overshadow that fact, but I've been having really good luck on it, and... like I said, I really recommend it for trans masculine people. And again, you can mix and match. Pick one of these and an estrogen cream, or do whatever the fuck you want, because it's your body. And I hope that with this video, with the information I've presented in this video, that you will be able to customize your transition and figure out what you want to do to make your body as heckin' comfortable and happy and awesome as possible. And there are actually some other treatments to atrophy that hopefully I'll be mentioning in another video, but they're never gonna be quite the replacement for the estrogen that your body needs to regenerate cells and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, if there's anything in here that I have missed that needs to be in here, please leave it in the comment section. If you have any questions, clarification, anything like that, please let me know in the comment section. And I hope y'all have a lovely day. Oh, I was also gonna say, I actually saw somebody on Reddit who got endometrial ablation and a tubal ligation. Like, 2 procedures at the same time, I think. I think they got both of them in one go. So 1 recovery period instead of 2. And for them, it was basically like a replacement for, or like a real alternative for hysterectomy. No medication that has to get replaced or refilled, etc. I also forgot to mention with NuvaRing that, you know, with estrogen cream, it can be hard to remember to use it. It can be really dysphoria-inducing. NuvaRing, you put it in there 1 time a month, 1 time every 4 weeks, and then you have ADHD like me. You just set a timer, not a timer, you set a calendar day on your phone every 4 weeks, and it goes, change NuvaRing, and then you set it and forget it. I love you, NuvaRing. Thank you for making me not pee during sex anymore, because that shit was really embarrassing, and that's too much information, and I will end the video now.